that. There you go. Excellent. Cool. So we're recording now. And I will up here. Well, hey, Rob, thank you very much for joining us today. This led us to myself project and giving us your time. I guess I'd like to start off just by asking, who is Rob Newman?
Rob Newman. Rob Newman's a 53-year-old org psychologist that started out not knowing what he wanted to be when I was at uni, and ended up, most of my work now is in the boardroom. So I observe boards and interact with directors, that sort of stuff. So if I look back, there was one statement I made when I think I was an undergrad. One of the lecturers asked the question of the group, what do you want to do for a living? What do you want to do for a job? And I said, I just want to wear a tie. I want a job where I wear a tie. So I actually, funnily enough, I don't have to wear ties now, but I'm in the suit at least.
Excellent. Cool. Well, hey, I guess so. Operating in the boardroom is kind of that upper echelon of organizational work. Can you give us a quick summary of, I guess, of your career and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. Okay. So when I started uni, I started a Bachelor of Arts. I thought I would then move into law, but I had insight into those subjects and I found them extremely boring. Normal arts degree, 3 years. After 4.5 years, my dad said, I'm not paying anymore, because I just did I suppose, a well-rounded Victorian Bachelor of Arts degree where I did everything from ancient history to philosophy. And when my dad said, hey, I'm not paying no more, you've got another 6 months to figure out what you want to do. I looked at all the subjects that I'd done, and I had a choice of education or psychology, because I'd done enough to get to the next level in each of those, and went, I don't want to be a teacher. So I went into psychology. As I got into psychology, I realized that I probably don't have a personality that's well inclined towards counseling or therapy. So I moved, and certainly not research. So I had an affinity for groups. So I moved into org psych. Bob Dick was a lecturer at UQ, went to UQ, and he kind of inspired me in the sorts of things he did. So I ended up doing my, at that time it was a diploma rather than honours, and then went on to do my master's, which in the end I never completed because I hated doing the writing of the master's. So I actually didn't complete it fully, but secured my org psychology profession as based on the work that I'd done by then. So I think I probably moved into org psychology in about, I would have been about 20, maybe 27. Before that, my first job out of uni was actually in mental health. So I ran mental health teams, as they were deinstitutionalizing people out of mental hospitals. And my job was, it was actually org psychology, because my job was to set up teams to support people who lived in the community, keep them out of jail, keep them off the streets, those sorts of things. And I set up, that was probably my first experience of, I suppose, intense teamwork. And we set up self-managed teams to manage about 100 clients who are all distributed around Brisbane. And these self-managed teams, which was about 150 people, actually managed those clients themselves, whereas I set up the system so there were checks and balances. But yeah, that was my initial org psychology. And from there, I went into consulting and started off consulting with leaders, doing leadership development, as we all do. Training was, we had a training guarantee level. So that's how it tells you how old I am. That would be 20 years ago. I think all companies had to spend 10% maybe on training. So we were doing lots and lots of training, mainly communication and teamwork training. That moved into coaching. So a lot of leadership coaching, which moved on to organizational culture stuff. And my coaching kind of not ended, but it went up through the ranks. So I ended up in the C-suite. It wasn't too long. I've always kind of worked at that managerial level, but most of my work up until about 12 years ago would have been in the C-suite. So I'm with executive managers, as lots of org psychs find themselves. And at that point, I often hit CEOs and execs saying, we're okay, talk to our board. They're the ones with the problems. So I ended up in working with boards too. And I suppose for the last 12 years, I've been looking at how governance operates at the board level to change culture or dynamics or interactions or performance in the organization below.
No, excellent. Really interesting. And, as I listen to you, there's so many similarities. When I first started uni, it was in the education space. When I first started, actually out working as a psych, it was in an EAP and much more mental health oriented, and very much I'm spending my time working with the C-suite at the moment. So, and I actually want to get into more work with boards. I've really enjoyed that aspect too. So a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, I think it's kind of not an uncommon trajectory. I've looked at a number of my peers, and some people find that their sweet spot and they just love that zone. So I know a number of sites that love the change management zone and culture especially, and others that love the C-suite. I must admit, sometimes I miss the C-suite. I still do it, but it's not my big game now, because you have people who are right on the edge of needing to perform. In the boardroom, they can lay back a bit and almost hide in the crowd. But if you're an executive, performance is primary, and you've got that pressure. And org sites in particular, especially myself, I love when we're looking towards performance. There are lots of work environments where performance and productivity may not actually be the main game for the organization. It may not be set up for that way, but C-suite tends to be that way. So I miss that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's an exciting place to play. I just wondering, so I guess throughout that career that you've had so far, were there any key really formative experiences that you had maybe in that first half that have really had a big influence on you?
When I was doing my my university studies, Bob Dick ran a course called at University of Queensland called 479, and it was a group facilitation course, and it was an unusual course at the time because it ran for the whole year, and you had a whole day a week on this course. So it was quite intense, and Bob Dick's very much a process facilitation guy, and he also let the students design the course, which freaked some people out and made others love it. So that was pretty core to me, thinking, hey, this org psychology thing is really good, and I'm pretty well inclined towards it. So I think Bob Dick and a lot of my peers in that group, so Greg Dean would be an example from that group, and there's a few others who have gone on to great careers. And I think actually for many org sites that went through that course, it really cemented org psychology as their game. So that was important. I think the other important one was when I was working in mental health, and that was 8 years or so of working in that space. I wasn't doing a lot of therapeutic work. I was setting up teams, so it was still org psychology of a form, but it looked like mental health, I suppose, from outside. And I found I wasn't really good with dealing with the same people over time. I became bored and somewhat distracted and not useful for them if I spent too much time with somebody. As in, when I say that, I can spend a year or two with them, but if human beings have this nature of replicating the same problems over and over again in their lives, and I found that to be somewhat problematic for me, and I wasn't useful for them. So when I realized that in mental health, I decided I got to leave. And there was actually one moment when I realized that it's horrible to think about now, but I've been working with this guy for, I don't know, 4 years. He was homeless, but we helped him find a home and settle down. But he had a hearing problem, and he never wore his hearing aids. And I realized one day I was almost baiting him, going, "Hey, what did you say? Hey," and repeating back. And I went, "Oh, I know that was." I was entertaining myself with this guy. I said, "Oh no, that's on the verge of being pretty evil. Rob, stop doing it. You've got to get out." So I realized I couldn't do that kind of ongoing relationship work, which I suppose therapy is associated with, and some internal org psychology can be like. So I didn't. I realized that EAP wasn't for me at that point. I probably knew it already. And in that regard, that kind of tipped me, okay, well then it looks like it might be coaching period for people for a period, or working with groups for a period. And I could see I'm probably close to a project-based psychologist than an ongoing internal change agent that hangs around and has all of the history in the back of their mind. So if that's funny though, because if I look at most of my clients, we would stay with, me and my colleagues would stay with an organization for at least, I think most of the minimum will be 5 years. We're looking at 10-year relationships generally. Some of them we still have from when we started. But I think what we end up doing is working with different people on different problems over time. So that project-based project-based mentality set me up for being an org psych, I think.
Yeah, no, I imagine that would be a pretty important insight, I guess, to have in terms of the opportunities that you pursue throughout your career.
Yeah, for sure. I've never actually worked for an organisation other than the mental health job I did first off.
Yep.
Since then I've been a consultant, so that would have been since I was 27 or 28. I've been a consultant, and which was kind of funny because I'm relatively conservative and jumping in and trying to fend for yourself relatively young. I used to think of myself as quite young when I was 28, and there were all these old grey guys doing the work that I was trying to do, and I was going, oh geez, who's going to listen to me? And in the first few years, we didn't make a great deal of money. When I say few, it was probably 3, and we only started earning a real income in the, kind of the 4th year. Had enough money saved up, and I don't think we even owned a home at 28, so it didn't make that much difference to us. But yeah, it was a bit of a jump and a bit of a leap of faith to become a consultant.
Yeah, so and I guess I want to ask you about that, because that's an experience that I had. I went straight from university into running my own business, a bit by accident, not exactly planned, but that's the way it turned out. And I guess that almost the imposter syndrome there of who's going to listen to me. Am I good enough? Do I really know what I'm doing to make that leap?
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about how you manage that.
I didn't, like most of us don't initially. So initially I was going, oh, who will listen to me? So it was a big leap, and I think it always is. I think that's just the nature of a young person going out for the first time, trying their hand at their craft. I think it changed for me when I started doing coaching in a formalized way. I mean, a psychologist almost always does coaching, if I think about that. And org psych is always coaching, even if they don't call it that. So when I started coaching, and then I realized that some of the basics that we know about humans, as psychologists, humans don't know. And so I realized that some really simple stuff makes a big change in people's lives. And when I thought that, I thought, okay, well, in our studies, we learned some of the complicated stuff, and especially as going through masters, there was the complicated elements of organizations and their culture. But in fact, much of what we do is dealing with almost what we would call psychology hygienes. That's the big game. That's where the big gains are made. And when I saw that, I went, okay, well, that's not too complicated. I don't need grey hair for that. That's simple. The other thing, I suppose, that changed it for me was when you listen to people long enough, you spend some time with them and you gain some rapport and you understand the challenges they have in their environment. You don't need to be special to help them. So you don't need to have grey hair. Sometimes just the unloading process. So I reckon if I said what was one of my earliest skills that I had to develop, and perhaps to some degree I've lost a little bit as I got older, was the ability to really listen and be with the person in their zone and in their challenges, and to sit with them. And as a psychologist, we're really well skilled in being able to separate ourselves from that and then look at it as objectively as possible and help the person with guidance. Hopefully not too much advice, because they should be able to find the advice in the system they already exist within, but guidance to help. So I think listening was probably the first point where I realized, hey, I've got something of value here, and it starts off with really good listening.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I think that's probably one of the biggest keys that helped me through that period, was always thinking about, what is it, 60 to 70% of the client outcomes is based on the relationship, not the content of the session. And if I can listen, if I can build rapport and they feel valued and heard, then it really doesn't matter what I say. They're going to walk away in a better place. And I always found that reassuring.
Very much so. And I suppose as I got older, one of the things that has become a weakness of me, and I'm very aware of it now, is a tendency to listen. But I've got pretty good advice, but sometimes it comes out too quick.
Yeah.
And there's no need to bring it out quick, because it's much easier if the other person finds their own way of working that advice out with our guidance. But the unfortunate thing is, the game I'm in now, people want answers real quick, and the problems are fast moving, and they're not normally individualized. And so the idea of offering advice to a collective and supporting a collective is a little bit different from listening to an individual and helping them find out their way.
Yeah, definitely. So what's made you successful? What are some of the key characteristics or traits or behaviors or things you've done that's really made you successful today?
Okay. I don't always feel successful. I mean, still look at my life and go, I don't need much more in my life, but in terms of money and lifestyle. But I mean, I'm not a billionaire. Everyone's a millionaire nowadays, but I'm not too outrageously successful. But if I do have some people that listen to me, and they're worthwhile people that I enjoy being with. So I suppose that might be success. Key things for success. When I was young, I started work early. So even when I was in high school, my mum and dad are working class business people. So they ran service stations, but we lived in a working class town. I was probably the richest boy from my mates, but it didn't feel that way because everyone was working all the time. So were we. So I worked really early. So I always had a job. My mates were out drinking and I'm working a service station. And then through uni, I was a nightclub barman. So I spent most of my weekends working. So getting used to hard work was a good starting point. I don't mind working. Downside is I actually have to have something to do. Otherwise I go a bit stir crazy. So I can't always relax, so to speak, or I relax by doing things. So that was my first one, working hard. Second one, when we came out of uni, when I say we, there was 3 of us who actually formed Change Focus, which currently exists today. It's currently my employer today. It's my company too. So we formed it, and one of us fell away, got married and went overseas. His wife was, I think, indentured to work overseas. She was a doctor and had to work in her country. So he left, but the 2 of us remained. So we've been in business since we left uni, and having a business partner basically probably kept me a consultant. I reckon if I didn't have my business partner, I'd probably work for a consultancy firm. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what I would be doing. I don't think I'd work inside an organization other than being a consultant for a firm. So having a business partner, because together we're able to, and he's a great psychologist, Dave Holsworth, and together we bounced off our psychology as we were learning and as we were doing our practice. So there was a lot of, we don't actually have to fill in our PD points, because every week there's at least, I would say, 4 to 5 hours of PD of reflecting on what we did and what we did wrongly or what we could improve on. So having a business partner was really useful. I'm a little bit more laissez-faire in my, I suppose, work and business practices. My partner's a lot more structured. That meant I always was working from a firm base. He was the one who reminded me, did you ask that client to pay that bill? So having someone beside me was really useful. And funnily enough, if I look at it, that whole process of being with a partner over a long period of time who was a psychologist, it actually made me, well, obviously a better psychologist, but actually a better person. I really enjoyed that interactivity with another psychologist, and not just one. We had many people moving through our business, continually learning, continuing being challenged by my colleagues. Hey, that wasn't a nice thing to do or the right thing to do. But continue learning. So I actually came out a better person, I reckon, from that ongoing relationship. I reckon if I'd have been a consultancy firm where they drive hard for billable hours and that reflective process they can be done, but it's not always done. I don't think I would have benefited so much.
Yeah, no, great insights. And I guess the flip side to that question, what made you successful, is what have been your biggest mistakes, and what did you learn from them along the way?
If I think about one of my worst mistakes, it was when I first started doing 360 feedback online with an online survey. So when I started, there was no such thing as online surveys that did that sort of thing. But I ran my first one, and so it would have been 25 years ago, or maybe longer. And I buggered it up, and I actually sent the feedback to the wrong people, and it was. Oh man, the system, and I couldn't quite understand how the system operated. It was relatively new to me, because probably need to remember that when I was in uni, my first degree, there weren't computers. So there was no such thing. I remember asking my accountant when I first came out, should I buy a computer? Is it tax deductible? And he says, you're going to use it? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what it does. So I buggered up this survey. And at that point, I looked at my business partner and said, what am I to do? I feel I need to tell this client. He says, because I probably could have, I suppose, worked it so that it sorted itself out, but smoothed it over, so to speak, or maybe spun it a little bit. But business partner and I said, let's go and tell the client. So I told the client, and the client was aghast. It was the CEOs, executives, a number of them were kind of getting the wrong feedback. And then we'd already worked out a plan to deal with it, and we dealt with it massively, put so much more effort in than the contract was worth.
Yep.
We went out of our way. We, it was a very much we told people we've made a mistake. We're so sorry. We went out and fixed it. That CEO, I still have work with. So when you make a mistake, admit to it.
Yes.
Yeah. Especially if it's consequential. There's some mistakes you make and you go, the client won't know any different, and I've added value and it doesn't hurt. It didn't meet my standard necessarily, but it was fine. That's okay. But that one, and anything that might affect the quality of the outcome, I think is where I would go, yep, no, that's one needed. It just showed me that the things that we're trying to train our executives to be is what we should try our best to be too. So we're role models.
Yeah, very much so. And I try and keep that in the front of my mind whenever I'm running a workshop or in a coaching session, is role modeling for the client what I'm trying to get them to do, which I think is important for any successful psychologist. So I guess, the whole aim of this project, right, is to provide some advice for people early in their career and just kind of entering into that org psych profession. If you were to give yourself some advice, all those years ago, given that your wisdom and insight now, what would that advice be?
It would be early on in my studies. Don't get worried that you are not focusing on one thing. I was young. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I had some talents, but they weren't clear on how they were to be applied. So don't worry too much. Just explore and be curious. So I spent, and it worked for me, but funny enough, I worried while I was at uni of what am I going to do for a living and what's going to be like. But I love this subject and I love that subject. So I'd say don't get too set on your way too early. So I fell into psychology, but it was a whittling down in terms of I had educational psychology. I looked at it and went, well, wasn't too bad at education, and psychology I enjoyed too. And I went, actually, my thing was, which one will keep me away from people telling me what to do? And so I went to away from education into psychology, because I can tell people what to do. Maybe
right. Yeah.
And I saw a career there. So when I got in psychology, I still didn't know I wanted to be an org psych.
Yeah.
And in psychology, of course, we get overwhelmed by a whole lot of data and a huge and growing body of research. It gets deeper and deeper and more complicated. And now that there's much more mathematics and biology built into it too, it's massively complicated. And you go, oh, it can be quite threatening. So my other one would be realize that in practice, if you're wanting to be a practicing psychologist rather than a researching one or an educator, in practice, the complexity of what we do and what we study is not always what you focus on in practice. You focus on a lot of the basics of human beings and human beings in groups. So don't get overwhelmed by the complexity. The complexity is worthwhile, but once you've got the basics down in your practice, that's when the complexity comes in. The things that you can't explain based on the basics is where the complexity of our science comes in.
Yeah.
I think the other part I would say is, as a young org psych, was I was a little bit confronted or made to feel lesser by management theory. So there are people that run businesses who have MBAs and all of these, or the other one was technical theory. So people who are engineers, so they've got these other professions. I'm often offering advice to them, and of course, they've got some hard-nosed stuff that they can point to and say, we made up physics or whatever they do. And at times I was going, oh, how can I help? So scientific, all of this. But funny enough, and most psychologists will find this very quickly, is they're still humans. And they still have all the foibles and the strengths and the weaknesses of being humans. And then you put them in a group and they have the same foibles of any aggregate of humans, how they interact. So it doesn't really matter how smart they are. And I suppose if I think about my career now and working with boards, these are the most accomplished people in their careers. So they're the most, and also they're the most, often the most ambitious, driven, and sometimes the most arrogant people around their careers and their success. But I don't have any discomfort in being in the room with them, because I realize they're human beings too. And that's what I know a bit about. So not to feel overwhelmed by the other professions that you may work with as a psychologist, that you have something of value, and they'll often see it and they'll often seek you out. Those people, especially people who are ambitious and driven, they want to gain the edge. they want the upper hand, and we're often offering them insights into themselves, which help them to gain that. So we have a lot to offer, even very accomplished people.
Mm. Yeah, look, it doesn't take too long when you're coaching CEOs to sit there and listen to them and actually go, what are you doing? Why are you thinking that way? And I'm constantly reminding myself of I guess a bit of a mantra that one of my supervisors, Mike Allen, used to continually tell me is what's obvious to you is not obvious to everybody else. And I think that is something a great. I've found great solace, I think, in that
Yes.
regardless of what the experience of the people that you're working with is and how
Yes.
accomplished they are, there are things that are blatantly obvious to me that are just aren't obvious to them, and
Yes.
part of my role then is to help tease that out.
Yes, yes. One of the good things about this dynamic is that it's hard for us to feel superior. We already know that they are accomplished people, but we can offer a little to them that helps. Sometimes I think advice givers feel superior to the receiver of advice.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I ever feel that way about it, because I go, I look at you, I look at my client, I go, I can do nothing, none of the things you've done can I do. So you're already like there. My job is to add some value in the places where I can. I'm not no more superior. I'm just an expert in a different body of knowledge than you have. That's all. So yeah, I think psychology, org psych, does keep you. It keeps you humble.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. So okay. Next sort of question. Obviously, psychology has changed a lot. In the what did you say? 35 years. You've been in the profession now.
20, close enough. 30 probably.
30 years, right? And so, as you, I guess, given some of the changes and some of the things that you're encountering today, what would some of the experiences or things that young psychologists could do that would really set them up and provide them a solid foundation in the modern kind of world?
Okay. One of the things I do a lot of now is in the space of decision making, and it's the concept of how do you deal with facts, and how does that then get analyzed, especially with groups, not so much with individuals, but with groups. So it's collective decision making. And one of the things that we all experience now is the polarization of opinions and views, and how in fact we now have camps, and people find it very hard to bridge that gap between camps, and it's actually affecting decision making, including decision making in the boardroom. That polarization. So if there was one skill that I'd be saying that org psych should have, it's the technical term for it's crucial conversations, but the concept is basically how do you encourage people to be both strong advocates for their view, but curious and just as strong in advocating that the others should speak and I should listen too. It's getting that balance. And I know when I was young, I used to think that someone who was perhaps overly assertive and strong, I used to think, oh man, credibility of that. But then I saw that others didn't necessarily get on board, or if they did, they just did it because that person told them to. And this concept of how do we find a collective way forward rather than one of us being the boss and the leader and the others being followers, because that doesn't work either. Because what followers do is when things don't go right, they point to the lead and they say, his fault, not mine. I just did what I was told to do. So I often point that out to leaders that, hey, that game, you think you're winning, but in fact you will lose in the end because they'll blame you. And the moment your back's turned, they don't do what you expect. So this idea of trying to find a collective way forward, trying to find common pathways, trying to find common positions when we actually are polarized to some degree.
Yeah.
So that is the big game now, and that transcends technology. It transcends apps. It transcends software and digitization. It transcends AI. That will always be from now on. That will always be a problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is one of those skills, being able to facilitate some of those conversations that, regardless of, it's probably only going to become more and more important, with AI and all those technological advances you just mentioned. And that's never going to go away. Yeah, awesome. Hey, one of the big things that I'm a big proponent of, I guess, is networking and kind of collaboration. And I know I got off to a really solid start in my career because of the amount of networking that I did. So I just wanted to kind of ask you, in terms of your networks, how they benefited you, and how important is that for you in your career?
I probably had a different trajectory to you, and
Yep.
I know lots of other psychs because I have quite a limited network in psychology. Is probably the
Yep.
best way to put it. So, and it might be because I've always had my business partner. So in terms of reaching out to psychs and be able to, supervise or provide feedback from the same professional. But my network's actually quite limited. What I found was, especially moving into the psychology that I'm into now, most of my network are allied professions. So I'm
Yep.
working with technologists, or I'm working with managers, or I'm working with directors or professional governance people. So
Mhm.
they're actually not psychologists. And when I think of it that way, and I go, my network there is big. So my network is not psychology. In fact, only a small number of psychologists now. I mean,
Mhm.
familiar with many, but not on a daily basis. And most of my networks would be in other professions. And so they're often my client professions, but sometimes they're my peers. So when I'm on a project, I would normally be the only psychologist on the project. We would
Yep.
have an engineer, a technician. So there'll be lots of other professions that I'd partner up with. Yeah.
Yeah.
That said, that network's vital. I only get business that way. Or it's not true. You get business from clients telling other clients it's great, but I get new projects and really interesting, complicated ones when I'm with those people, because, if I'm man-marking myself with other psychologists, we'll kind of do psychology projects together. These ones we're doing, technology change, or we're doing governance technical reviews of large scale systems, where a psychologist alone, I go, I can't do that, but all these other professions allow me to get in. Yeah. So from a professional point of view, networking is important, but don't limit it to psychologists.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I'm a big proponent of the coffee. Just go and grab a coffee. But it's great to have a strong, I think, psychologist network early on.
Yeah.
But definitely, as you kind of highlighted, if you only are reaching out to psychologists, then that really
Yes.
does limit, one your network, but also the opportunities that come your way.
Yeah.
Uh,
Actually, just thinking about the idea of networking, when I was young, the need to understand how psychology fits into the practice or society, that was
yeah,
important. And you
yeah.
only get that through other peer psychologists. So I think you're dead right. Maybe I was lucky that I had a small group of peers, and that was good enough, and we worked day to day together and changed focus. So that was probably where I got that. If I think about it now, I love meeting the psychologists, because sometimes, especially younger psychologists who've just come out not long ago, because they often push my understanding of theory beyond where I am, because I'm
Yeah.
old school. I still read, but I don't read the latest edge stuff, and certainly I'll read a meta-analysis, but I won't read all of the sub articles associated with it. So
Yeah.
they'll push me, and I love that. So technically I get pushed by psychologists. Business wise, if we talk about network and building business, then
Mm.
it's all the allied professions rather than psychologists.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Um, I guess on some of that latest cutting edge stuff, where do you actually see the profession of organizational psychology sort of heading?
I think if we think about organizational psychology when it comes to coaching, the neuro stuff is really getting more purchase. I mean, 15 years ago, it was just catchy and an interesting way of thinking about things,
Yep.
because it didn't actually relate to any biological or physical process. And now we're actually getting closer to biological and physical process. So we're getting um, a lot more information and knowledge around concepts like attention,
Yeah.
concentration, memory, and how they apply to decision making, not just as individuals but collectively. And I think that's interesting. I don't think it will. I always say to my colleagues, we can't even replicate the taste of sugar with something that's not sugar. I don't think
Yep.
we're really that advanced in the understanding of human minds that can't even make my tongue taste something that's not sugar. We can't make something taste like fat. They all say they don't taste like fat. So our biology and our physiology, I don't think we're as advanced as sometimes we try to promote ourselves to be, but still it's there. So I think there's a lot in, especially in concentration, attention, memory. They sound like really minor physical processes, but if you're talking about a pilot, those are pretty important. If you're talking about the boardroom, I see in the boardroom, we watch anxiety levels go up in boards, and then you see the narrowing of thinking and the quality of decision making, quality of contribution goes down. You go, okay, this has to do with anxiety's impact on attention, concentration, the narrowing of views. So I think that's there. The other leading edge, of course, is just big data. And the social example of that is what we spoke of before, the amount of data of information available, but the inability of human beings to actually accommodate it. And so in the end, you end up going, I just want to listen to this small view because it's easier than contending with a whole lot. And the realization, when you have more data, you realize that things aren't black and white. There's a lot of gray, and human beings have difficulty dealing with gray. It's hard to act in gray because then you create a risk for yourself or you miss opportunities. So I think our society will have much more information available to it, and our organizations and our employees have much more information available to them, but aren't always able to use that appropriately or well. And sometimes it becomes so confusing that they give up, and we actually end up with people ignore data and they ignore logic. And I think the thing that we're really facing now is the whole idea of the social construction of reality, that if I believe something, therefore it's real, and I can collect a whole lot of data and facts that tell me that. But there's a whole lot of data and a lot of experts are saying the opposite of that. But, it's what I think, I'm allowed to have my opinion, and the reality is my opinion. I go, that has started to shape professional thinking too.
Yeah.
So again, we're coming back to this idea that this need to get down to brass tacks about rational thinking, logical thinking, and decision making. And I think there's something else that we've missed for a long time, and that is the concept that intuition, non-rational decision making or non-rational analysis, I think that's starting to come in, and it's useful. It's just bad if it's not able to be justified or verified or worked through a rational process. But of course, most of us make decisions on a daily basis using non-rational processes. There's nothing wrong with it. The question becomes, how do you do it collectively? How do you do it with others? Individuals can do it on their own because as long as their decisions don't affect too many other people, it's normally okay. But collectively, and I think the data is too complicated for us to use rational processes all the time. In the boardroom, I often speak to, where's your gut feeling? Is it just indigestion from lunch, or are you just feeling something wrong here? If you do, in the boardroom, you should speak up about that. And they'll often say, no, I don't want to do that. I can't defend it. I've got no logical rationale to explain that feeling. I go, don't need it. There's too much data here, too much complexity. Put it out there. Do it tentatively. I'm feeling a little awkward. I don't know why, and I might be wrong. Is anyone else feeling this way? And that's very hard for professionals, because we're coming back to this body, this mind is not just a conscious process. It's also an unconscious machine that does pretty well most of the time, unconsciously.
Yeah, and so it's interesting as you're talking about those, really kind of three areas, particularly the attention and concentration, the big data, right, and then the intuition, and they're all very much linked. I think, in there's so much information out there, right, that we struggle to pay attention to any one thing. And Jim Quick talks about digital deluge, and you just can't pay attention with all of that. And then, very, very much that intuition is linked. And I think also into the neuroscience and the biological side of things, it's very much playing into how, what's the physiological kind of aspect to the intuition that is so important. So, I 100% agree. I think attention and concentration in the current space is something that I'm looking personally a whole lot more at in recent times. So brilliant. All right, well, hey, we'll start to draw this to a close, Rob. Any last kind of insights or reflections that you'd like to provide, people entering into the profession in the near future?
If I had to, someone asked me, what is org psychology? I normally give them kind of a breakdown of the subcomponents that I think is important. So that might be useful. So I always think about, we have human beings and we understand something about them, values, capabilities, cognitive processes. So there's our starting point: understand human beings and measure them well, and get some understanding of why they behave the way they do. Then put them into groups, and then look at how the individual behaviors actually aggregate, morph, and sometimes create a synergy which is beyond the individual contributions into a group dynamic. And so we might start off by thinking about family dynamics and how they operate. But what does that look like in a social setting or in a business setting? So that aggregation of human beings in groups, and often that creates almost another living being, which you'd call a group dynamic. That's good to know. So that's another body of knowledge. Individual knowledge, knowledge about individuals, knowledge about group dynamics. So I think about it that way. The third element I'd bring in is, how do human beings interact with systems? And systems may be technical systems, machinery, tools, data systems, business processes, policies, procedures, how you do things. And that's how the group and the individual operates within an organizational structure. So a deeper understanding of how systems operate to influence behavior of individuals and groups. And that creates another dynamic. So that's actually often a new body of knowledge for psychologists, because we didn't do systems theories. That all came out of management science. And so complex systems theory is another area that's worthwhile when you're getting into the more complicated stuff, because you can't explain individual behaviors just based on the individual attributes or even the group dynamic. You have a look at how it operates within a system. And I think that's probably the ultimate. If you can get to that point and realize that, unfortunately, sometimes I wonder whether we have much free will, because I'm shaped by my social setting and I'm shaped by the structure and systems. I know on a day-to-day basis I can choose what colored shoes I want, but on average my behavior is relatively predictable based on where I sit in the social and the organizational system. So I often think like that, which makes it complicated, but it also makes it relatively, it makes it humane and human.
Yes.
Individuals aren't in full control of all their behavior. We are fully responsible for all our behavior, for sure, but we aren't always the man leading them or the guiding light of them. So understanding those elements, I think that's important. So if I think about that, if you stay at the individual, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think org psychology needs to be seen in working with human beings within systems much more. And not individuals working within systems, but the collective behaviors. So we're starting to move into something that's closer to sociology, I suppose. And I think organizational psychology could be called the sociology of organizations, of business. And I think that's probably where the future will lie for us. The other professions, the other elements, individuals and collective dynamics, we're not too bad at, and they're good to be good at. This last one, I reckon that's where we make the big game. That's where we should be in policy units. Org psych should be in nudge units, the old nudge economics, that sort of stuff, behavioral economics. I mean, we already have that. We should be more. We should be in boardrooms, and we should be in government, offering our advice around how human beings work within a system. And I think psychologists see every day policies made by government or by companies that you go, that's not going to achieve the outcome they want. It's got some perverse side effects, and it will come pretty quickly, and there it comes. Okay. So our knowledge doesn't get used sometimes in that space. So.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think there needs to be much more, particularly at that government level. I think most of us would agree that if they had some insight from people with our capabilities and expertise, that probably things would have been handled differently, particularly over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think so. That said, still a bloody hard job, and the good thing about psychologists, all care, not all that much responsibility for the outcomes in the end, and that's probably my last piece of advice to myself, and that would be, as a psychologist, you're going to have to look in the eye of people you've given advice to after they've implemented that advice and felt the consequences. So always be wary of that weight you hold in your hand. When you're that responsibility, you're responsible not just for the moment, not just for technically good advice, but the consequences later. And so I've always liked the fact that I've been with clients over long periods of time, because I've seen when my advice hasn't worked so well. But I've been there with them, and sometimes I've got a kick. Hey, Rob, that was bad advice. I went, yeah, no, it didn't quite work. Probably didn't account for some things, but we continue those relationships. So we hold a lot of weight if we're able to get in that space, and being respectful of that too is important.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for your time, Rob. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody watching this will as well. So hope you have a great day and rest of the week. And we'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, Cliff. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You turned us off?
Just wait.